Welcome, everybody, to the One Voice Public Policy webinar. This is brought to you by the National Tooling and Machining Association and Precision Metal Forming Association, who joined their advocacy efforts in Washington under the banner One Voice for Manufacturing. I am Paul Nathanson, a partner in the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. Today, I am on with my colleague, Caitlin Sickles, who is at the Women in Manufacturing Summit in Boston. And we are here together with Omar Nashashibi, who is with Inside Beltway and has been representing NTMA, PMA, and several other manufacturing organizations for a long time and is your voice on Capitol Hill. So, Omar, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Yeah, actually, before we get started, maybe Caitlin, do you want to run us through some of the work that you all did on a video, given this is Manufacturing Month?
Absolutely. So happy Manufacturing Month, everybody. Hopefully people had time to celebrate Manufacturing Day last Friday. Manufacturing Day celebrated the first Friday in October. What you're seeing on the screen is a video that we put together for One Voice, highlighting bipartisan support for manufacturing and the manufacturing industry. You see some quotes in the video from different members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. There's also some quotes in there from former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. I love this message that when the country feels divided, manufacturing unites us. If you'd like to share this video during the month of October, celebrating Manufacturing Month, and we certainly hope that you will. You can find it on the One Voice social media accounts. Look for it on X, look for it on LinkedIn. Feel free to share it on any of your company or personal social media platforms to celebrate Manufacturing Month and what the industry does for the economy and what politics has in common with manufacturing.
And as we get started, if you do have questions, please don't use the chat. There's a little Q&A with a question mark button. And so you should put in your questions there and we'll do our best to answer them.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have Caitlin or Paul can put a link to this here into the Q&A for folks to be able to take back. And also on the onevoiceinfo.org website, under resources, we do have a section there for Get Out the Vote. We do this every 2 years, and we have now for more than a decade. And that's just where general resources. We obviously are not telling employers and employees how to vote, but it's more of understanding where the resources are that are available for individuals to find out where they can register, key deadlines, where to vote, and all the issues that part of civic duties. And Paul, thank you for putting that in the chat right there. You can go ahead and, well, we'll over time here, we can put it out into the broader group. So appreciate all the work that Bracewell and others did on that. That is very, very effective and helps us with our messaging up on Capitol Hill. As we jump back here into the slide deck that you can see, there's usual quite a bit to cover. We are going to try to get to a hard stop by 12:30 Eastern today. Again, appreciate everyone's patience for the rescheduling. We had a NTMA and PMA event on Friday with a member of Congress, soon to be U.S. Senator, that precluded us from doing this at our normal Friday at noon time. So here we are. Let's go through it. Obviously, quite a bit on the agenda, dealing with regulatory activities. Not a surprise with Congress gone. On the trade front, especially in the month of September, we saw a culmination of a lot of the Biden administration actions come to fruition that they started when they believed he was still going to be the candidate against Trump. And of course, we are ongoing with disasters that are literally, as we record this, are continuing to hit and batter some of our colleagues down in Florida. Let me just start at the top here on the longshoreman strike that was averted. And since many of you all are aware of what happened last week and the disruptions that were caused, we heard from a number of our One Voice members about this, and certainly were concerned by products either being on the water or customer disruptions as well. It's key to note that while we did have this averted for the short term, that we are coming back and they are going to be dealing with this issue again by January 15th. What it appears as such is that we did have a tentative agreement over wages, but they still haven't addressed the issue of automation. The automation issue would clearly be the larger sticking point, as it could be precedent setting for what's permitted and what's not within the union agreement that could spread to other ports around the country, including back over to the West, where we know that we had all those issues in 2014, 2015, and then obviously more recently than that. A few other things that are to be said on there. Capitol Hill definitely took notice on this issue, and in the interim, between now and January 15th, we'll continue to look at what policy changes might need to be made to avoid such disruptions. There's legislation that's been introduced on Capitol Hill that would make the maritime workers have the same requirements as rail and airline before they are permitted to go straight on strike. So that is something that we will continue to track and watch closely as policymakers look to review that process. Briefly up on Capitol Hill, U.S. Congress did depart for the campaign trail. As expected, they left a little bit early on September 24th after they passed funding legislation that would punt and allow them to go into the December period without having a government shutdown. So from the congressional side, we did have a continuing resolution that is the way that they do not have a government shutdown. The government will stay open now until December 20th. The U.S. Congress, neither the House or Senate, they have not together completed any of the 12 bills that they have to all pass and send to the White House. And right now, it's unclear whether we'll have a giant omnibus bill or a series of smaller government spending bills that will determine the fate of government funding, but we will know that after the election sends us that way. They are likely there will have to be some kind of disaster relief assistance. We don't, as of right now, we are not hearing Congress is going to return to Washington prior to November 12th to put out additional funds, but that obviously could change at any moment. But they are getting prepared to provide additional relief to help folks that were in the way of both the different hurricanes that are coming through right now. But in the end, what we are hearing from the Hill is that the primary focus is going to be on government spending. The National Defense Authorization Act, that's the Pentagon bill that the Senate did not take up in September, and the Farm Bill that's still languishing and expiring as well. So those will probably be the three main vehicles on which we try to attach a number of bills and a number of processes that are out there. A few other things to take a look at from Capitol Hill before we go over to the regulatory side. President Biden did sign a bill into law last week, and this came out of the congressional work that they just did over a few weeks ago on semiconductors. In the CHIPS Act, they're trying to expedite the semiconductor constructions of facilities, but there's been environmental regulations and delays and lawsuits, as you can imagine, as environmental groups, as always, have sought to restrict some further activities. This law would exempt the semiconductors that are being funded under the CHIPS and a few other laws from being subject to the NEPA. This is the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, which is very significant in that this does a couple of things. Not only does it waive the environmental review, this might also potentially waive any PFAS cleanup that some of these folks might have to undergo, and that's also further complicating things given all the PFAS requirements for forever chemicals. So that's something to note that Biden did sign into law, one of the few bills that Congress has passed of substance in the last few weeks in September before leaving on the campaign trail. Switching over to the regulatory side, which as usual is the bulk of our conversation here. Things for you to be aware and terminology changes, please pass along to your HR team. OSHA has restructured its regional offices and is no longer going to be calling them by their regions of 1 through 9, and they're going to be now referring to them by the seat of the region by city. For example, Region 9, which is now a 9/10, will now be referred to as just the San Francisco region, and will cover all of the West Coast that's out there as well. Not as much a real realignment with the exception of Birmingham. It does create a new office that's going to be down in that region to be able to address, as you can see, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, a part of Florida towards the Panhandle, and Kentucky, Tennessee being headquartered and housed under that Birmingham office will be the new area. So just now note that if you are getting visits, it's going to be described a little bit differently. Shouldn't be a surprise after you hear from them once or twice. Please pass along to HR. For our colleagues that are again in the New York and New Jersey, there is a webinar coming up on Wednesday of this week on hearing conservation. It obviously does target our NAICS industry in this. This is pretty common that OSHA regions have been doing it. The Missouri region did something similar on this about 2 or 3 years ago, and we'll continue to seeing hearing and noise being a significant part of the emphasis programs, both at the national level and at the regional area as well. Picking up on some of the conversation that's going on WIM, and I think we'll get a great update from Caitlin here in a few minutes on the conference that's going on. There are some additional grants that were just awarded with regards to women in apprenticeships. So you'll notice some of the recipients that are on here from different states, from Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh to San Francisco to Arkansas to Arizona. And the goal here is to increase women participation in registered apprenticeship programs in non-traditional as well as traditional occupations. So that in manufacturing is cited here as well. that's something to take a note of. The grant recipients can use a portion of the funding for services from childcare to transportation and work-related gear and tuition. So that's something to note if you're in one of those regions, to take a look and see what opportunities might be there to partner either at the district chapter or individual company level as well. This is a flag from a follow-up that we told you was coming at one point and now is here. The Invest in America executive order that was released about a month ago now. What the executive order does is it focuses and provides an emphasis for agencies that are engaging with contractors to be able to put forward prioritizing rather engagements with contractors that use registered apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs that are going to matriculate into registered. But then also what's not included in here, but was similar to in the past, is also them emphasizing entering into contracts and agreements with companies and contractors that are organized and have a strong union presence, and also give priority to training programs that are union-led or union participations. Again, not a surprise there, since they gave us forewarning that it was coming, and now the executive order is officially here to direct the federal agencies to take steps to increase that cooperation. A federal appeals court did recently opine a few weeks ago that the employers are not required to present contrary medical evidence prior to contesting a doctor's certification. And what it means is the FMLA does not require an employer to seek a second or third medical opinion before contesting the validity of a certification. This is a court case. It wasn't related to a manufacturer, but we did want to put this out there that if it does look at the different health condition arguments under the FMLA, and that the court did favor in terms with the actual employer in this case and not with the employee. So something to note that if it does happen to come up, please pass this along to HR and also on to the legal team that might be involved in it as well. The Workers with Disabilities Department of Labor tool. The Department of Labor launched last Monday, and what it does is it allows employers to it assists employers with ideas and how to help accommodate workers with disabilities. And we do know, we've been told over time that we do have a handful of companies that do specifically seek out workers with some level of developmental disabilities for employment in some areas of their shops. And using the Jobs Action Network, Jobs Accommodation Network, we dealt with them a few summers ago on refugees. They are looking at potentially trying to help employers. So I screenshot a few things that you can pull from your drop down. If you go to that website, you can pull down, you can search by the disability, you can search by the function that you're trying to do, you can search by whether or not they have certain limitations, and then it brings back ideas for how you can provide them gainful employment, and then also again, in times of where you're looking for workers, maybe you'll bring some demographic into your shops you weren't thinking about. So we thought we'd flag that. Bringing back to the elections and our friends out in California, just a flag for you. Employers, here's your latest poster that you have to put up around California elections. If you are scheduled to be at work during the time of election and do not have sufficient time outside of working hours to vote at a statewide election, California law allows you to take up to 2 hours off to vote without losing any pay. So that is something that you need to know, that you could take off as much time as you want to vote. You can see how you're going to enforce that one, but only 2 hours that will be paid. California, please focus and please note under your state laws and the requirements for this poster that is out there. You can download that on the English version down here at the bottom there with regards to coming up in the election. A few things also for your calculations. This one shouldn't hit too many companies for the most part, but there are thresholds for if you go way, way back to Obamacare requirements, where there's a trigger for providing affordable healthcare to your employees, in that the healthcare cannot exceed a certain percentage of their wages. And that was just adjusted and published 2 weeks ago on September 19th. And that the minimum value requirement does not exceed 9.5% of your household income. But this percentage is adjusted annually, sorry, not on wages, but on household income, to try to manage and keep that as a certain area. So for those that are employers sponsored plans, please keep a note that that threshold went up from 8.39 to 9.02%, and that is the latest threshold that they focus around that 9.5. Over on the Department of Energy, this was a really big deal from the White House, where they went forward with a pilot program that the Department of Energy is going to launch with regards to calculating greenhouse gas intensity from certain industries in the United States, such as steel, iron, and a few others. What the government is looking at doing is finding a way that can calculate the greenhouse gas emissions footprint for certain industries as they get ready to deal with the European Union on their version that already is taking reports and will ultimately be required to file certain and to pay rather tariffs on imports of certain products into the EU. And that's where they are right now. This pilot program, it should be, well, it was announced on Wednesday, the 25th or so of September. And the goal earlier in the week, what they're hoping is to have a stakeholder meeting and a webinar coming up by the end of this calendar year, obviously depending on the election, with how to figure out how to get companies to better track and then report to the federal government their greenhouse gas emissions and their inputs that are there as well. For you Michiganders, there was an announcement also on the 23rd of September that the Treasury Department is offering $9 million to small businesses through the state, through the MEDC, that would go towards funding for capital investments. Remember, we talked about this now in December of last year, maybe it might have been November, with regards to assisting supply chains, smaller businesses adapt and supply for the electric vehicle industry. So those are now been pushed out, and more dollars in addition to the 50 some odd million, or 150 million rather, that was announced earlier in the year. This is and added on to that as well. Treasury on the AMT. This is for the corporations that exceed a certain amount of revenue. If they're if they're reporting $1 billion in profit per year, then they would be required to pay a corporate minimum tax of 15%. This is a proposal that the Treasury Department has floated in alignment with what they promised under the Inflation Reduction Act, and after negotiations with the global community on some kind of a global minimum tax on larger corporations, and that has now been floated, not law. Again, it's on revenue and about reporting. This is an Elizabeth Warren big priority that's out there. One other thing on the reporting requirement for Small Business Administration, Section 504 loans. We do know that we probably have had at some point, maybe at 5 and almost 10% of our members have taken either a 504 or a 7A or an EIDL loan over the last several years, certainly since since COVID, and even a few years before that. This is an update with regards to the 504 direct final rule that they're going on debt refinancing without expanding that. And their hope here is to streamline the loan application process for eligible folks to refinance some of the small business borrowing that's out there, to make it easy for them to refinance everything from physical property on land, facilities, and machinery. So wanted to flag that. We, again, don't have a lot of members, but I definitely know for a fact we have some that have used and are using a 504. Please be aware of that as well. And an update that we always feel like we've got to provide whenever IRS says something on the employee retention tax credit, since over 80% of our members were involved in the Paycheck Protection Program, and around that same amount were involved in the employer retention credit and claim that credit for keeping employees on during COVID. The latest on this is the IRS is announcing that it is allowing a supplemental claim process that would help a third party help their clients resolve incorrect claims. So previously, the relief that the IRS is providing, you've had to go yourself to them. They're now allowing you to bring in a third party that can come in and do an adjusted 941 and do that claim, so you can back out anything that might have an inadvertent claim on the employee retention credit, though trust most of you all are settled and feel confident in the claim that you all made on that. But just note, IRS is continuing that process there as well. Quite a bit on trade came up, and some of this is really important to make sure that both from your sales side, if you are competing with China, that you're aware that there's might be possibilities of imports coming into the United States from China that would not be subject to a tariff temporarily if companies here are granted an exclusion request that could potentially be on the process for USTR to accept an exclusion, and you could potentially oppose that as well. What the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative did is on September 13th, and then they officially published it on the 18th, is they started a new process where they're increasing tariffs on certain products coming in from China, and that particularly related to steel, aluminum, and some other electric vehicles go to 100%, for example. But what they are doing is they're accepting comments through October 22nd on the effectiveness of their new updated action to increase the tariffs on certain products coming in from China, and also to create an exclusion process. Comments are due on October 22nd. So we're going to run through a couple of slides here that are going to show you examples of what's being increased and eligible for exclusions. And please reach out to NTMA and PMA if you'd like us to file comments. And if you see something of interest in there that we do need to be cautious about. The action that increases tariffs on Chinese imports, this is in response to the Section 301 review that was required after 4 years of implementation following former President Trump starting the process in July of 2018. The tariffs increase in a couple of stages. One, September 27th of this year, 2024. We'll show you examples of those products, but then those will typically be at 25% with the exception of electric vehicles from China that are going to be up at 100%. And also zinc, chromium, tungsten, cobalt ores, chromium ores, and a number of other products in those lines. Those also increase on September 27th to 25%, along with a few other areas, ingots as well, a lot of steel under Chapter 72, and you can see even some aluminum in here. We just copied and pasted and clipped. A lot of tool steel items coming in from China are now going to be subject to a 25% tariff rate, effective September 27th. That's already in effect. Anything that is in a later year will be on January 1 of 25 or January 1 of 26. We received an important question here. Is China circumventing U.S. tariffs by shipping into Vietnam and Mexico and then moving goods from those countries into the U.S.? Yes, absolutely, 100%. And it's not just Vietnam, it's Malaysia, it's Thailand, Indonesia, and a few other places that it's going through. But Mexico is the biggest issue. We've had conversations with with folks over at the U.S. Trade Representative and the Commerce Department as recently as 3 weeks ago, right before on September 12th, had a call with the Commerce Department on this, and then again on Friday the 13th on supply chains with them. So yes, this is 100% an issue of circumvention, which is how when we get into the USMCA negotiations that they're looking at putting in additional restrictions on what can come in to Mexico. There's a hearing tomorrow, October 8th, at the U.S. International Trade Commission as part of his investigation into the rules of origin and the regional value content for automotives under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement and the impact and effectiveness of those provisions of RVC and RO on the U.S. domestic industry. So this is 100%. It's not just automotive. We're hearing it for appliance as well down in Mexico. This is a real issue on which both NTMA and PMA are actively engaged. We know Roger Atkins for NTMA is actually with the counterparts down in Mexico trying to address some of the situation and talking through that process as well. So yes, that's certainly there. A few other things to look at from this slide. So this is from the Federal Register notice, which it gives you an idea of some of the products that are going to be and are now subject to increased tariff rate. You can click on that link below and you'll see the broader list. It's multiple pages. Here, this page, you'll want to take a look at what products that you import that you might be using that you could potentially see now an increase in tariff rate on. And then the second page, you'll get a sense of the exclusion process that they also created at the same time. An exclusion process under Section 301, as a reminder, allows a U.S. importer in the United States to petition the U.S. Trade Representative to request relief temporarily from paying the tariffs through what's called an exclusion. You or someone will file a request. USTR will review it, the public can comment and oppose it, and then it will either be granted for a period of up to likely May 31st of 2025 or not. And you'll notice that on here, there's a number of products that were granted automatic exclusions. Those are solar equipment, but then there's a application process that your customers could potentially be requesting an exemption for importing certain machine tools, whether operated by laser. There's water jet cutting machines in here. So the way to look at this slide is twofold. One, are there products on here that I manufacture that my competitors in China might be now shipping into my customer? If in fact that is the case, please certainly reach out to us as we need to file comments by October 22nd as to whether or not we oppose the inclusion of any of these products on the list that would allow them to be suspended from paying the 25% tariff. If in fact you are importing a product, a machine on this list from China, whether it's a press brake or a other stamping machine or roll forming or there's milling, there's lathes, there's turning centers in here. There's quite a bit. The Biden administration wanted to provide temporary relief for manufacturers that are importing so that there wasn't such a shock value hit, was at least the intention behind providing this exclusion process that's here. Please note again, comments initially here are going to close on October 22nd, and we encourage you to take a look at that full list, also in the same register notice as the other one that I just put out there, for you to be able to see if there's anything of interest or of concern to you here that you may want to reach out to us on or take a look at yourself. Sticking with the Bureau of Industry and Security over at the Commerce Department, BIS is barring connected vehicle supplies, and this is a very important step that the US is now asking Mexico and other countries to do similarly. And this would bar, is a proposed rule that would bar hardware and software that's integrated into vehicle connectivity systems from entering into the United States, whether in the components or in the vehicle, excuse me, or the vehicle itself, which would effectively bar almost every car that's being manufactured in China, or any car that's being manufactured with parts that are originating in China. And that's something that's going to cause some additional disruption on here. And that's something to watch, especially as that might change for obvious reasons. The connectivity issues of great concern in the United States, but I would caution that this is going to go, and if not already, beyond just automotive and start thinking about farm equipment, thinking the agribusiness and the crops and all of those that are automated, and the connectivity equipment that could potentially be coming from China and feeding information back, washers, dryers, all of those personal or commercial, all of that equipment could potentially be next as they're focusing on these areas. Last couple of slides here on this, we'll turn over to Bracewell in a little bit here. The administration did finally act on the de minimis since Congress did not move forward. Congress likely possibly will at the end of the year in the big defense Pentagon spending bill, try to address some China issues. But what they're doing at the administration level, similar to what Congress wanted, is to bar any products from entering in from China under $800 in value without being subject to a tariff. So if the products are one of the 40% of all goods coming in from China that are subject to a tariff, if they appeared under $800, that's how they're getting around paying the tariffs, is bring them in smaller shipments. This would now mean that any product that appears on the 301 HTS list for tariffs, even if it's under $800 for that shipment, would be required to be subject to that tariff action. And that was done on September 13th, following calls from Capitol Hill to do that on as well. Off of trade, just this is, I know a lot on this slide, but DoD has been really focused on supply chains. And we've known this for some time, but there's been a concern about the defense industrial base. Obviously, both these groups have been very active, NTMA in particular, on this. So there's additional funding that's coming out up to $150 million for up to 10 applicants. Not a lot of obviously not a lot, but it shows that it could trickle down through the defense base and try to look for construction, expansion, modernization for commercial equipment, and looking at some of the different categories that they are trying to, from advanced manufacturing to bulk materials, solar, spacecraft, and some of the other areas that they're looking at on electronics and fabricating equipment as well. So just note, DoD is continuing to put priorities on the supply chains and where they go. In addition to this, is $15 million to increase heavy forge production that went to Lehigh Heavy Forge. So this shows that they're even giving direct dollars to some critical industries, especially as we're dealing with a lot going on NATO restockpile and elsewhere. And then lastly, as you get ready to turn it back over to Bracewell folks, the Commerce Department supply chain tool was officially launched on September 10th, and then again on the 12th and the 17th. The Commerce Department Industry and Analysis, we spoke with them on Friday the 13th. What they did is they've come up with a diagnostic supply chain risk assessment tool known as SCALE, where it's got a number of factors as inputs where they can look at and prevent and try to address disruptions in supply chains before they occur or during. And they are going to increase their stakeholder outreach. I was on one of those calls where they did a preview to some of us in the DC crowd, and they're going to be doing this more regularly and expanding it, especially into 2025. But speaking of factories and automation, Paul, I know that this has been an area of big concern for the media.
Yeah, in today's Wall Street Journal, there's a story about the slowdown in manufacturers purchasing robotics, and the two manufacturers who use robotics or are quoted are from NTMA and PMA members, Jack Schron and Bill Adler. So it's a big story that Bob Tita published today. And one thing Bill Adler and probably Jack really talked to Bob a lot about the tax bill and the importance of reinstating expensing and R&D, and Bob acknowledged that, said I didn't have room for that in my story today, but I do want to follow up with another story. So always important to have those who are on the ground and actually experiencing and dealing with these issues available. So we appreciate both our NTMA and PMA members who volunteer. And I know more of you volunteered than got to talk to Bob, but don't get discouraged. We'll be referring. We'll get more media opportunities. We get them every week, and we'll put them out there.
Thank you. Just for helpful for folks again that are affected, a few things just to note on hurricane relief, and we'll continue to provide updates for those that want to reach out directly on this, since we expect more resources to come out from the federal government in the near future. One thing that we are looking at is obviously they do this all the time when it comes to taxes, and they do have an extension in some dates, not by much, it's 15 days for 2025, but you'll continue to see some of these kinds of things that are going to roll out over time to provide additional assistance and relief to individuals that are affected that's out there. Similar, you can see the Small Business Administration did last week, week before last now, launched their website for what to look for and where to go seek some assistance. Please note for your employees, there are opportunities here where you can have them seek some assistance in addition to what you might be doing directly. The states also have this. If the counties, Hillsborough, for example, has their own disaster relief assistance. I would also note on here that there is a disaster support for businesses rather, and that is if somebody is affected or you know that somebody that is to take a look at that as well. Lastly, here, there's just a few other areas you can take a look at what they're looking at. This is a micro look at the business physical disaster loans. That is also kind of give you an example of machinery, equipment, fixtures, inventory, leasehold improvements are some of the things that they'll be able to help you there. And I'm going to ask Caitlin to jump back in here if she could, as there's with regards to women in manufacturing and the event that is ongoing as we speak right now, which is quite a bit of attendance that Caitlin can jump in.
And it was standing room only this morning. The launch of the 14th annual Women in Manufacturing Summit. I am attending the summit here in Boston, Massachusetts. There are something like 3,100 women participating. There's at least 2,500 here in person, and then there was a hybrid and virtual option for participation online. Tons of companies in the room, lots of WIM members. For folks who may not be tracking, membership in WIM is up over 30,000. Lots of us knew Allison Graylis at the time that WIM launched. They are going on 15 years. It's really something to have seen the progression in the organization there. The event goes on today and the next 2 days. Lots of breakout sessions and keynote speakers and that kind of thing. I will say this morning's keynote speaker, in addition to Allison, who was fabulous as usual, but the morning's keynote speaker was a woman named Samantha Rappaport, who is the head of DEI for the NFL. It was fascinating. So really good event, kind of a hybrid of both, like, things that are sort of focused on career development, mentoring, networking, and then a lot of like sort of standard industry technical conversations, role of AI and that kind of thing. So it's a great event. I'm super glad to be here. And definitely lots to tune in. I'm pretty sure a lot of the content will be made available after the fact. I know both TMA and NTMA are supporters and advocates for WIM. So great event.
Really impressive. Thank you for sharing that. As we get ready to wrap up, please type in any questions that you might have in the Q&A box over there. We'll get ready to answer it. We've got one in there so far that I'll answer in a second. As always, please stay connected with our One Voice podcast. This is the one where we'll get more into politics. We'll be recording another one this week. And obviously a lot going on between now and leading up into the election. As always, please, your support and advocacy is very much appreciated and is what makes all of these webinars possible and our efforts in Washington, D.C. on your behalf. Please click the link below there to provide a corporate contribution to be able to support your associations and support you in Washington, D.C. With that, get ready to wrap up here. Just almost at 12:35. Got one question. The others, please feel free to type them in there. One question: any word on when claims might be processing again for the employee retention tax credit? I have peers that are wondering. I'm going to refer back, since we didn't have a webinar last month, but we did put out a slide deck. In slide 33 from last month's deck, it does say that the IRS is continuing processings on August 8th. The IRS did send out 28,000 disallowance letters to businesses whose claims showed high risk, but at the same time in August and late July, The IRS has also identified 50,000 valid employee retention credit claims and is quickly moving them into the pipeline for payment processing in coming weeks. These payments are part of a low-risk group of claims. So that was the August 8th, and we included that in our slide deck from last month. We will start to ask around, but to that person that asked the question, they should be processing. If that is in the low risk category, then and one of those 50,000, then yeah, they should be hopefully moving out here in the next few weeks if they hadn't already by October, by Labor Day. Any other questions? Anything we can answer? I think we see a hand raised. I don't know if this is an unmute kind of thing or if Bill, you want to type it in, or if you can unmute, go for it.
Okay, yeah, so I called into the IRS concerning my ERC, and I received a confirmation that they do have my request and that they are processing them starting in August, and mine is just in the pipeline. So you can call into the IRS, the third party, I'm trying to look up their name right now, and request to see if your submission is still there and waiting to be processed.
Excellent feedback. Thank you, Bill. It's very helpful. And also affirmation why we like, go ahead.
The Taxpayer Advocate Service, TAS, if you do a search for that, there's a number that you can call in and give them your EIN and they'll call you back.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That is very, very helpful, Bill. I appreciate that input and that feedback. And also again, reaffirms why Zoom is a lot easier to use so we can be more interactive on these. Thank you. Any other questions or any other thoughts? No. Well, thank you all for joining us. Appreciate your flexibility in the rescheduling of date. Note that we will not talk again before on this prior to the election, but you will certainly hear from us on our other platforms that are out there. As always, please feel free to reach out to any one of us or to Christy at NTMA or to Jenny at Christy at PMA or Jenny at NTMA with any questions you have. Thank you all and enjoy the week.